If podcaster A was going to record a podcast using a particular type of online software, and podcaster B was going to use a completely different type of software, is it possible that both of them can do a show together? Well, I made it happen. I'm going to tell you how on this episode.
Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? Thank you so much for being here. I am Chris, and yeah, this is Podtastic Audio, the show which I have designed and created to help you, yes, you, make an amazing show for your audience, and that is what it's all about. You deliver the amazing content, you record it and get it out to your amazing audience so they can enjoy it, so you can create it, and have so much fun creating an amazing podcast. I absolutely love podcasting. I think I actually love creating and editing content in general, but I think audio podcasting really holds a special place in my heart. I absolutely love creating this stuff, and that's probably why, I literally do this for free. When I create a podcast, although I do make some money from podcasting, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I do really enjoy the actual creation process of sitting down, taking audio, taking a recording audio, and packaging it together and making it sound the absolute best I can, and then distributing it out to all of the wonderful podcast places so we all can enjoy it. And no matter what app you're using, no matter where you're listening to the podcast, you can enjoy this amazing content. Now, if you're going to record audio for your podcast, where do you start? What kind of equipment do you use? What kind of software do you use? What kind of recording platforms do you use? My goodness, this can really get overwhelming. There's so many different choices. There's probably close to 1 million different combinations of choices you can use to create and record an actual podcast. But when it comes to recording something for your podcast, I would suggest finding a way that works absolutely best for you and your schedule and your financial situation, because some people will spend tons and tons of money on gear and equipment and software and new computers and new cameras and all this crazy expensive stuff, maybe thousands of dollars on this stuff to get their podcast put together, to get something recorded, and editing it may cost money. You got to pay for that if you don't do it yourself. And then if you want to do it yourself, how do you do that? What software do you use for that? Like I said, there's probably 1 million different ways to get a podcast down. And if you're starting a podcast without understanding any of the intricacies of how to make a podcast, then it can become very, very overwhelming. There are software platforms out there right now that can pretty much handle a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Descript always seems to come to mind, that people will use Descript, take audio from either a Zoom call or some other audio recording of some kind. They'll put it into Descript. Descript makes all of the transcript so that when you are editing that audio or that podcast, you're editing it like a text file, so that when you do edit it, you chop out this word, that word, but it's not done in a typical WAV format. It's not done in the audio sense of things. It's kind of done in a way where I think a lot of people probably feel a little more comfortable editing with something like Descript. When you put them into an audio editor, we see the wave lines. It kind of freaks them out. Oh my gosh, these wave audio file lines. What do I do with these things? What do they mean? I don't know what they're saying. I don't know what this line means. I don't know what that stuff means. So when it comes to editing, I know a lot of shows will actually farm out their editing services. I have dabbled a little bit with editing myself. I have an entire editing page on my website. If you go to podtasticaudio.com/services, you will find my entire suite of services that I provide, from audio editing, audio recording, and even some one-on-one coaching. It's all right there at podtasticaudio.com/services. My top tier plan that I offer, my top tier package, I like to call it full service podcasting. In that full service package, I handle all of the physical audio recording. Like I actually sit down and record your podcast for you. And you're kind of wondering, well, how do you do that? And then I also take that same audio and I make sure it sounds amazing, get amazing audio out of it. And then I edit it. I make sure it sounds great, making sure the graphics look great. I distribute it out to your podcast media host of choice. And then I send it out and I do all the regular stuff that gets involved with creating an audio podcast. But getting back to the recording of their podcast for them. Now, how would you possibly do that? And the reason why I do it in the first place is because most people are really good at creating content, but they're not very good at creating good audio. And on top of that, they're not very tech savvy when it comes to having multiple people on the same show at the same time, different locations, different type of equipment, different gear. I know you can use something like Teams or you can use something like Zoom and you can record it all that way. But I want to make sure that when I promise to deliver an amazing podcast experience for their show, that I get the absolute best audio possible. And the only way to ensure that is if I physically record it. That way I can guarantee the audio sounds the absolute best it is. Now, how do I physically pull that off? I use Cleanfeed. It's cleanfeed.net. I've been using them for many, many years. The audio quality through Cleanfeed is so crystal clear. It is amazing. In fact, Cleanfeed was really designed for radio broadcasting and for like broadcast quality stuff. But because I have a Cleanfeed Pro account, it allows me to record everybody that I want on their own individual audio track, multi-track, in high quality WAV files for each and every person. And I can have as many as my computer and bandwidth can handle. But I kind of set it to, I think, 4. So the host and like 3 other people. So like 4 total on the podcast episode at one time. That feels like a fairly balanced out show. You can go up more. I mean, I've gone up to like, I think 6 people on a single episode for them. But that gets a little crowded. It gets a little wonky. Not saying I can't do it. It's just that it just gets a little crowded, I think, on the podcast when you have that many people on a single episode. So normally what I do is on the day of the recording, when we have scheduled out the day to physically record their episode, I give them a 1-hour time slot to record with me. They tell me what time and when that works best for them, and we book it, and it sounds great. It's great. So normally I send out the link to the host and anybody else that they want on that podcast episode. Usually it's like 2 to 3 people. And I'll send the link out, and then they all join in to me via Cleanfeed. And what I do is with Cleanfeed Pro is I can take my track and any other tracks out of the recording. I can only record what I want it to record. So if I only want to record the host and his guest, I can click his host and guest, and they both can talk to each other and have a great conversation. And I can record each of them in high quality WAV files, and it downloads instantly. And when I mean instantly, I mean during the recording, I can physically get those audio files while they're being recorded live. And that's the beauty of Cleanfeed, is that it does things in a live, almost like a live broadcast mindset versus other platforms where things get recorded locally, then you download them separately, and then you go to work on it later. This is designed so that if we wanted to do a live concert, like right here, we could stream it live using Cleanfeed to anywhere we want, any radio station we want, anywhere in the world, live with really low latency. And it does things in stereo audio. I don't know if stereo makes a big difference or not to you, but when you have high quality audio stream directly to you anywhere in the world and you're able to save it instantly, it cuts down on the waiting to download the files thing that usually happens with all of the other like platforms that do the whole online cloud double ender style of a recording, which is fine and all. But because everything comes through so quickly and it sounds amazing, is that the second we are done recording, I can have those files and go to work on them immediately. And when they're paying you, and time is money, the quicker you can get things done, the better. So the company that I record the podcast for is a major moving company here in the United States. They've got offices all over the country. They've got drivers for their moving company all over the country. And they like to talk about moving and all kinds of stuff that's related to their business and the industry. And sometimes they talk about sports and other things too. But Dan, the co-owner of the company, usually coordinates with me when and how they want to do the podcast, like what day and who's on the show and things like that. So a few weeks ago, he brought it to my attention that he wanted to have one of his like best drivers on the show that week to do a recording. And I'm thinking, great, let's do this. Let's figure this out. But then I'm thinking, if he's a driver and he's cross country somewhere, what are the chances that he has a full podcast setup? Probably zero. And what are the chances he has good Wi-Fi? Well, maybe close to zero. And what are the chances he knows how to set all this stuff up on the computer, even if we got it going? What are the chances on that? Maybe he can figure it out, maybe not. I don't know. So I was talking to Dan about this. I said, hey, I have an idea. What if there's another way to physically record you guys on the podcast together? And I'm thinking, scratching my head, like, how am I going to physically pull this off? What am I going to do? Because I know Dan always comes into me via Cleanfeed and he sounds amazing. That's because he's actually using an actual microphone. The microphone that he uses is the Samsung Q2U microphone. It's a microphone I recommend. If you're going to start out doing a podcast, you can use that microphone directly into any computer, directly via like the USB port, or you can plug it into any audio interface that takes XLR connections, like a Rodecaster Pro or a Scarlett or anything like that, a Zoom PodTrack, any of those ones. It works great for both. And it's like $50 for the microphone, and it sounds great. Now, that's great for him. He sounds amazing, comes into me all the time. But what do we do about his driver that he wants to interview on the podcast? So how do I figure this out? How do I make sure that Dan can interview his driver on the podcast and record everything and make it sound amazing and ship it out to his podcast media host? How do I do that when I am physically right here in this office, in this studio, at my house, which is probably a good 20 miles away from Dan's office, and he is in his office with his computer, his setup, and his driver is in Seattle, Washington, parked in his truck, which happens to be over 1,200 miles away from here. So here I am presented with this problem, and I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I make this even happen? How do I pull this off? Well, this is where an audio podcast really kind of comes in handy for situations like this. So then I remembered a time a little while ago when Christine and I were recording guest interviews, and we sent out a link to a guest to record an interview. They were up north, not quite as far as Seattle, but I think they were somewhere outside of San Francisco area. And we just assumed it would be just another, like, we sent them a link, they join in through their computer or their microphone or whatever it was, and we do the interview like we normally do. And for whatever reason, they kept cutting out. They couldn't hold their signal. Even when I switched the Cleanfeed setting down to the low talkback setting, which technically allows you to like do more with less signal, if that makes sense. That's the way they kind of explain it to me. But when people kept cutting out or their signal strength wasn't that great, I would bring the quality of the call down to like a low talkback. It still sounds fairly good, but it sometimes helps when you have somebody that keeps dropping out on the call. But this person, for some reason, kept really cutting out a lot, and it was getting so frustrating. And then it dawned on me that, wait a second here. I've got a Rodecaster Pro too. And I know for a fact, because I tested this, that the Rodecaster Pro 2 has got a Bluetooth option to connect a phone to your Rodecaster. And I'm like, well, I know I can do that. So here's what we did. I actually called that guest with my phone connected to the Rodecaster, and Christine and I conducted the regular interview, all done on the Rodecaster, all through the telephone. And I'm thinking, that was great. I recorded everything. Fantastic. But that was both of us being right here in this room. And I know Dan isn't going to come all the way to my house to record his podcast with his driver. He's just not going to do that. And I'm not going to bring this entire rig and all my stuff over to his office to do this either. So there's got to be a way to figure this thing out. So I got the idea. What if I called his driver with my iPhone connected to the Rodecaster? But then I'm thinking, is it even possible? Because I've never done anything quite like this, to where I got podcaster A, Dan, coming in via Cleanfeed to me, and I've got his guest coming in via my phone, via my iPhone, just calling him on the phone, coming in to me. Is it even possible that the both of them could even talk to each other? Is it possible that they actually could even hear each other? I know I could record everything. As long as the Rodecaster actually hears the audio, you see the signals on the Rodecaster going up and down, you know you can physically record the audio. That's not a problem. The problem I was kind of trying to figure out is whether or not if they both could hear each other and have a conversation without any kind of delay. Because when you're juggling multiple connection points and multiple things, running through a single place like my place is like Grand Central Station for their audio. It's all going through me and out to them with different setups. Is it even possible? Because I know there is a latency with like a phone call versus something quick like Cleanfeed, which has usually very low latency. So would that throw things off? And then are they even going to be able to hear each other? Because that also was throwing me off. How do I make this even happen? Well, I gave it a shot. I had Dan logging with Cleanfeed. I had him on the horn. I said, hey, Dan, hang on a second. Let me call your driver right now. I connected my phone via Bluetooth, and I switched it to focus mode to ensure that I made sure that nobody called me during this recording, or I got any messages or any alerts of any kind to disrupt the phone call. So the phone call was locked in to their driver, connected to the Bluetooth on the Rodecaster. And then I had Dan coming in like he normally does through Cleanfeed. So his channel was the USB channel coming into the Rodecaster Pro. The driver on the phone was coming in through the Bluetooth channel on the Rodecaster. And I was able to record. When I hit the record button, like I said, it records everybody on their own separate audio track. And here is a clip of Dan and the driver having a conversation ripped right from their podcast episode that I produced, talking about how Dan, the co-owner of the company, had just purchased new jackets for all of their drivers to use, to enjoy, because it was, I believe, Driver Appreciation Week. So this is what it sounded like. Check this out.
We made a jacket that could be worn as the days get longer, at night, as the nights get colder. So it's a nice warm jacket, but it's a reflective jacket. So it's not like you're going to wear this to church on Sunday. But while you're working,
it's one of those jackets we got to walk into the warehouse with. Is that what you're saying? Reflected and all that stuff?
It's a jacket. So when you're parking your truck at night and you get out and you're parked at a Love's or wherever, TA, wherever you fuel, you put this on. Okay. So when you walk across the parking lot, one of those knuckleheads from Swift doesn't run you over.
Okay. Swift doing all the hauling now. Leave them alone. they big boys too now.
Well, whoever it is.
Yeah, that's better.
Well, you want to know the number one place for accidents for the trucking industry?
With truck stops?
Truck stops.
Yeah, I had a guy back into me once. You know what I mean? But he paid for it then, so
yeah,
he didn't get that call.
It's still downtime, and inconvenience. It's like anything else, you're moving along, you got a busy schedule, and next thing you know, you got damage.
You got to go put it in the shop. You know what I mean?
So this jacket here is to keep you safe and to keep you warm. So I hope everybody likes it, but it's one of those things where
I'm saying,
we're pushing for safety.
Dan, you had somebody else. Picked it out. You picked it out.
You tell me if you like it or not, and I'll tell you if I picked it out.
we get back on that report then. All right, that'll work.
I had some help.
Safety.
Y'all are a hard group to buy for, and
you can't please everybody, Dan. You know that. No, ain't that what you tell me?
That's true.
So for coming in on just a phone, I think it sounds pretty good. I made it sound fairly good, and that's what I have done with their podcast, because I know not all of their guests and not all of their people on their show have the best equipment. Dan's got a good microphone because I bought it for him. That's why I physically gave him that microphone. And he bought one more for co-host. But in situations like that, when all you have is a phone, it is possible to physically take two different sources and run it through the Rodecaster Pro and record it. Now, if I wanted to, not saying anybody would, but if you wanted to, you could have like a podcaster A coming in on something like Squadcast or some other internet source, and podcaster B coming in on a Zoom or something like that. And you can physically record both of them, as long as I think you need two USB inputs coming in to the Rodecaster. Basically, you need two different sources coming in. In this case, I actually did. I had one source being the USB coming from the computer, and the other source was coming through my physical iPhone connected via the Bluetooth. So it is possible to do that. Normally, you wouldn't. Normally, you just would have like everybody on a Zoom call or Cleanfeed session or Squadcast, Riverside, whatever you use. Everybody would be coming in on that same singular platform, which makes things super easy to do. This only happened because Dan doesn't come by the house. Dan either records at his house or at his office with his laptop and his microphone, and that's all he needs. And I sit here and I record everything for him via Cleanfeed. And the same thing goes with him and his guests. And that is how I handle podcast editing on the full service scale side. Now, if you are looking for somebody to handle your podcast recording too, I might have some slots available. I know space is very, very limited. Or maybe you just want me to handle your podcast audio, make it sound the absolute best I possibly can, and upload it to your podcast media host for you. Easy peasy. You can find all my services at podtasticaudio.com/services, or you just go to my website, podtasticaudio.com, and you will find podcast services tab. Click it right there, and the full suite of things that I can offer for you and for your podcast are right there. So this has been so much fun. I enjoy trying new things and trying new experiments and seeing if they work and seeing what sticks. And I was able to successfully make an amazing podcast episode. Oh, and by the way, the full link to Dan's episode is in the show notes of this episode. So if you want to check out the entire podcast that I recorded for them, it's right there. And until next time, happy podcasting.